Hi everyone and welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to mattress stitch. Mattress stitch is one of the most commonly used seaming techniques in knitting. It's quick, it's easy, and it's so useful for whenever you need to join two bits of knitted fabric together. So I've got a couple of swatches here today that I'm going to demonstrate the mattress stitch on, and for this technique you're also going to need a tapestry needle, so a needle that's rather blunt on one end and has a large eye that's easy to thread with yarn, and you will also need some spare yarn to do the stitching. I'm going to use a contrasting colour here today so that you can easily see what I'm doing, but ideally for your mattress stitch you want to use a yarn that very closely or exactly matches the yarn that you used for your project. You can see that I've still got some tails attached to my swatches, such as here and here, and usually I would actually use those for my mattress stitching. So I'd thread my tapestry needle with one, I would work as much of the seam as I possibly can before I run out. And let's say if I was joining this seam, I was able to get halfway, I might then attach my tapestry needle to this tail and do the rest of the seam, or I can just secure off what I had remaining and actually then cut some more of this same yarn, join it in, and then I can do the rest of the seam. And that's particularly useful if it's a really long seam that you need to join together. Okay, let's get started. As I said, mattress stitch is super easy. All we're going to do is pick up a bit of this knitted fabric with our needle and then pull the needle through. Then we pick up a bit of this knitted fabric and pull the needle through. Then we go back to this fabric, pick up a bit, pull the needle through, back to this fabric, pick up a bit, pull the needle through, and we just keep zigzagging across, picking up a bit of each knitted fabric each time. Then we pull the yarn tight and it cinches these two fabrics together and we have a really neat seam where that's happened. So I'm seaming together two garter stitch swatches, and it means that along this edge I have these lovely garter stitch bumps. And that's great because they are really easy to spot, and I'm going to use them to actually pick up my fabric each time, and it's going to have a pretty neat edging when that's all joined together. In a minute, once I've done that, I'll show you how I deal with a slip stitch edging and how I would mattress stitch that together. And then after that, I'll show you how I deal with the bind off edge, which is very similar looking to stockinette fabrics, and how you would mattress stitch those together. Okay, so firstly, take my tapestry needle and pick up a bump on this side of the knitted fabric. Then we pull the needle through. And for the purpose of the demonstration, I'm just going to leave a bit of a tail of yarn here, and later I would go back and whip that into my fabric to secure everything. Now I'm going to head over to this knitted fabric, pick up a garter stitch bump with my tapestry needle, and pull the yarn through this side. And now those two fabrics are joined together loosely. Now once again, take our tapestry needle and pick up the next garter stitch bump above the one just worked. Pull the tapestry needle and yarn through. Now we go over to this side, pick up a garter stitch bump, pull the tapestry needle and yarn through, and we can hopefully start to see that those two fabrics are starting to cinch together. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Make sure you're really careful that you're not splitting any of your stitches when you pick up the yarn with your tapestry needle. And if you're trying to line up two stitch patterns, just be really careful that that is happening correctly and how you want it to, as you keep just picking up on each side. There we go, so that's what the start of our mattress stitch looks like. And all I'm going to do is just keep repeating that until I either run out of yarn and then I will secure it off and add some more yarn to complete the seam, or I keep going until I've actually finished my seaming. So back through one side and then back through the other side, and you'll see I'm picking up my bumps very close to the absolute edge of the fabrics, and that's going to create as minimal a seam as possible. It's not a very bulky seam at all, there's not a lot of fabric there, and that's excellent because it makes it really hard to spot where it's happened. Okay, so that is mattress stitching 2 garter stitch edgings together. Okay, so now we come to our slip stitch edging. I love how slip stitch edging looks with garter stitch. It's super neat and it has this appearance of a row of V's. So I created that by simply slipping the last stitch of every row without working it. And it has this neat effect. I did that knitwise at the end of every right side row and purlwise at the start of every right side row, and I worked it in stockinette. So to mattress stitch a slip stitch edging together, we have 2 choices. We can either do exactly what we were doing before and seam together the garter stitch bumps that are actually inside of the edging, or our other option is that we can pick up the entire stitch of the edging. So there my needles going through the 2 halves of the stitch, and then you pull through as before, and then we pick up a stitch on this side. So I'm joining together the very 2 bottom corners first. Pull your yarn through. So there they're secured, and then continue repeating that. So once again, pick up the next slip stitch of the edging, pick up the next slip stitch of the edging on this other fabric, pull the yarn tight, and that starts to cinch it all together. I'm just going to repeat that for a little bit, and then we'll come back so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so I've seamed together quite a bit of that edging now, and hopefully you see the sort of effect I'm getting. It looks a little bit like a plait or a braid. So there's a strand there, strand there, strand there, strand there, and it's a bit more of a decorative seam effect. If I hadn't used blue and I had used the same coloured yarn as this fabric, you wouldn't see those little blue dots there. That yarn would just be blending into the rest of the fabric. So if you don't like how this looks, you can use our previous technique of picking up the garter stitch bumps, but we need to do it 1 stitch in from the edging. So as close as possibly you can make it. Pick up a garter stitch bump, then over this side, pick up a garter stitch bump, pick up one on this side, and then pick up one on this side, and just keep repeating that. So you should see it looks very similar to before. The only difference is that because we've completely skipped our edge stitch and it's become part of the seam, this feels a little bit chunkier than our other seam. It's a little bit stiffer. I personally don't mind that because I feel like the seam is very secure that way, but you might mind it. So just keep in mind that you do have 2 options for this particular sort of edging. So that's how we mattress stitch together a slip stitch edging. Okay, so now we come to mattress stitching 2 bind off edges together. And I'm not going to show you how to join 2 cast on edges because it is pretty much exactly the same as what I'm going to do now. So we've got our edge from the bind off or cast on, and what I'm going to do is similar to what we were just doing before, where we completely skip the edge stitch and pick up into the fabric before it. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to completely skip the bind off, and then I'm going to pick up into the fabric before it, which is just here. So I'm picking up 2 strands, which is the equivalent of 1 stitch, and I just find it easier to pick up 2. It makes it a lot quicker than picking up 1, and I think I find that the seam is a little bit less stiff if I do 2. And then I come across to this knitted fabric, pick up 2 strands, and pull the yarn through. So if we just get those tails out of the way, you can see they're started to join together. And then we pick up the next 2 strands above the 2 that we just worked before. So there they are there. Pull the yarn through and come across to this side. pick up both strands and pull the yarn through, and then if I just pull my yarn to tighten, you should see how that's coming together. Now you might remember me saying that this technique is very similar to how we deal with stockinette fabrics, and that's because with stockinette we don't have a lovely garter stitch bump border to assist us with picking up our stitches. So we actually do something very similar to this. We simply skip the edgemost stitch of the stockinette and we pick up into the fabric that is between that stitch and the next stitch. So you'll find there's a little bit of a ladder type system of strands of yarn between each of the stitches, and I'll generally pick up 2 of those strands, and that's what I join together. So I'll just do one more, pick up 2 strands, pull the yarn through, pick up 2 strands and pull the yarn through. And that is how we mattress stitch. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions or comments, do leave them below.